Hello and welcome to another episode of Carpet City Cinema, a Gila Films podcast. I'm David Weaver, and it's been a pretty good week for Gila Films. The Last Frankenstein, we passed over 800 views on the complete movie up on YouTube, so great to see that, and so far, all positive reactions. Also, really got some great news in for Jay Leonard, our film's producer. His latest movie, Break Glass, just got accepted into its first film festival. I've mentioned this film in the past. It has a few different cast members from The Last Frankenstein in it: Keely Sheridan, Jeff Riano, and Jorge Luna. And Jay, directed and wrote it. And so, yeah, it's going to be playing at the New York Cinefest down in New York City on Monday, May 8th. And hopefully this will be the first of several film festivals they'll be accepted into. But, big shout out to Jay and his team for that. It's really great to see that happening. Otherwise, on the Gila Films front, I've just been digging into some research for the next script, which is the Last Frankenstein sequel. I kind of touched on that in a previous episode, how it's going to basically be, imagine a cross between the first Last Frankenstein movie and like a 70s prison movie, like The Glass House was the example I gave. And to that end, I've been reading a few different books just to kind of get in the right mindset. I started out with a really great book called New Jack by Ted Conover, which Conover is a writer who, a nonfiction writer who really gets very immersive into his subject material. So he wanted to get inside the perspective of a corrections officer, and because he couldn't really get cooperation from the Department of Corrections in New York State, he actually became a corrections officer. He literally went through the academy and was assigned to Sing Sing and spent quite a bit of time, just working as a CO, and then wrote this book about it. And he had done this previously with a couple other, cultural subgroups. He wrote a book about the kind of like the scene in Aspen back in the day, and he actually worked like some kind of, I think it was like some kind of blue collar job in Aspen just to get the perspective on that. And he also wrote a book about kind of like the last hurrah of people who rode trains, not as passengers, but who like basically bummed rides on trains, which is a much more difficult thing to do now, even though it was really common back in like the Depression era. And so, it's a great read if you ever check it out, New Jack. It's neither a defense nor an indictment of, the correction officer system or mentality. It's just a look at what it's like to be a corrections officer, what it's like dealing with coworkers and supervisors and inmates and the system. It's just really, really engrossing read. And that was the first book I really wanted to dig into in prepping for the script, which was a big help for sure. So after finishing that, I moved over to a book called Ball 4 by Jim Bouton, because one of the main characters in the Last Frankenstein sequel is going to be someone who is a former baseball player. And Ball 4 was a huge best-selling book back when it was written. It came out in 1970, and Bouton had pitched for the New York Yankees. And in this book, he chronicled his 1969 season, which was after he had been with the Yankees. He left that team. He was then with a minor league team. Then he went back up to the majors again. And it just was like an insider's kind of like very unvarnished look at life in the dugout, the kind of things that went on between players and managers and players and the team owners. But like I said, it was a big hit, led to him, Bouton, getting his own TV show, actually. He was also, around that time, showed up in Robert Altman's film The Long Goodbye, which is a great film, and he had a really key role in that. And just finished that book about a month or so ago. Also extremely well written. He's got a great sense of humor, so it's a really great read. And now I'm moving on to book 3 for the sequels research, which is another nonfiction book called Worse Than Slavery by David Oshinsky. And that's about the trustee system, which was in place back in the day, especially used down south, where they actually had inmates inside prisons who would be working essentially for the prisons as trustees. They'd even be armed sometimes to kind of look over some of the other inmates, which of course, as you can imagine, was a huge disaster. How that played out. And Parchman State Penitentiary down in Mississippi was kind of like this infamous example of that. So this book looks into, I just started reading it, but it really kind of starts out just by delving into the perspectives on black people from whites after the Civil War ended down in the South, and how the race relations, the desires of some people in the South to keep the black man oppressed just kind of led to these different changes, which will eventually kind of play into the rise of the trustee system and the development of Parchman Penitentiary. So in the script for The Last Frankenstein, even though the trustee system doesn't exist anymore, because I'm really obviously a big fan of the 70s and stuff, we're going to kind of be placing the prison setting within that realm, within that world, kind of like what we did in the Last Frankenstein, the first film, where the flashbacks are kind of this, not meant to be a specific time period. They're more representative of this larger time period of like, the 60s or 70s or maybe early 80s, all the flashbacks on the reservation with the young Jason Frankenstein. And even the modern day stuff, we tried to make sure it all had a vintage sensibility to it with, everything from people wearing, bootcut jeans to, shooting on locations that had a mid-century look. So just kind of keeping that mindset with the sequel, it's again, it's going to be set in contemporary times, but kind of in a way to kind of evoke that mid-century feel, that 70s feel, kind of doing things that, might not necessarily be super realistic, like having the prison where most of the action is going to take place still be operating under the trustee kind of system. That's the book I'm reading now. Just got into it, a few chapters into it, and really looking forward to kind of ingesting that. And as I continue to work on the script, I've got a couple other books as well that I want to dig into after that. I mean, that's kind of the reason I read Ball 4 as well. I didn't want to just have a look at baseball, the life of a baseball player from any perspective. I wanted it from this very distinct 1970 perspective, because that's, again, just kind of keeping that whole theme consistent. And nothing too much else at the moment that I can talk about. Hopefully next week we'll have some interesting updates. I did pick up just a little thing, but I picked up a promotional still for UFO Target Earth that I didn't have. I have a set of like 7 of them. It's hard to come by stuff for UFO Target Earth because it just wasn't, it's not like even like Creature from Black Lake, which is a film I'm a huge fan of, which I've talked about in the past on this podcast, because I helped track down the rights for Synapse to put that on Blu-ray. Even a film like that, which isn't necessarily a household name among even 70s horror fans, there's still, you can find quite a few copies of the posters and stuff like that out there. I found a number of lobby cards and even foreign posters for that movie over the years that I've collected. But UFO Target Earth, I mean, that's even a much smaller film and really hard to come by anything. I've obviously found a couple of issues of Box Office Magazine that talked about it, and I did pick up a set of promotional photos, 7 photos. That was like a year or so ago. But I just happened to, I check regularly on different sites for stuff for sale and came across someone who had a promotional photo that I didn't have yet. I was out in the Netherlands. I had to order it from there, so it cost a little bit more than I probably would have preferred. But like I said, it's hard to find anything for the film, so it's worth it just to have. And yeah, all that stuff, of course, is going to get scanned and added into an image gallery on the Blu-ray when we get to that. So moving on to other things going on in the film world. Interesting to see that Clint Eastwood is gearing up to shoot his next movie. This will be his 40th directorial effort. And, he spent most of the last, let's see, about 45, 46 years-ish at Warner Brothers mostly. Like, he shot some movies for some other studios as well, but that's where he's really spent the bulk of his time. The first several films he directed as he started trying his hand out behind the camera were at Universal. But yeah, he then transitioned over to Warner Brothers. And the current head of Warner Brothers, the current CEO, David Zaslav wasn't really a big fan of the leeway given to Eastwood. Eastwood's last film, Cry Macho, didn't really do that well at the box office. But you look at Eastwood's directorial efforts over the last several years. He's obviously had very lucrative films, like American Sniper and Sully. But even the people who were at Warner Brothers prior to Zaslav knew that Cry Macho probably wasn't going to be a very successful project. Just they could, looking at what it was about and the audience that it would attract. But they went along with it because Eastwood has this huge history, not just in film, but with Warner Brothers itself. And Zaslav. It said he made a comment when this was explained to him, it's called show business, like not show friendship or something like that. And so there was some concern that Eastwood's tenure at Warner Brothers might be coming to an end with this leadership here. But I guess it looks like things have resolved because it's announced that he's prepping to shoot another movie later this year called Juror Number 2. The premise of which is a member of a jury realizes that he is responsible for the criminal act which someone is on trial for. And he has to, he's caught between making sure this person isn't found guilty of a crime they didn't commit and his ability to maybe sway the jury to convict this person so he's not blamed for it. The names mentioned for the film are Nicholas Hoult is being looked at to play the juror, and Tony Collette for the district attorney. I'm a little bit more, I'd say I'm more of a fan of Eastwood as an actor than I am as a director, even though, I do like some of the films he directed. But still, it sounds like an interesting premise. I don't know how it will come out. Eastwood, there's rumors going around, of course, this is going to be his last film. He hasn't said that. I think obviously that comes more from just him, about to turn 93, that you probably at this point they'll say any movie is his last movie. But I know he's expressed an interest in directing to the age of 100. So who knows? Even if things didn't work out between him and Warner Brothers, I think that he could definitely find a spot at another studio. The big thing with being at that age is insurance. I think more than anything is coming to a project, wanting to direct a film. And, there's obviously going to be concerns of ensuring that director to live through the project. But at least with a director, it's probably, I would imagine, easier to make that happen than, say, an actor. If Clint Eastwood wanted to star in a movie at this age, that would probably be a lot more difficult because, a director could always have someone step in, but it's a lot harder if you've already shot half a film with your leading person. But yeah, cool just to see him continuing on. A huge respect for his work ethic. I mean, he's someone who's just constantly working. I mean, this guy started at Universal back in the 50s. Obviously all big fans of monster movies know that his first film was Revenge of the Creature, the sequel to Creature from the Black Lagoon. But, went on from there to be on Rawhide, and then the great success he had over in Europe with the Sergio Leone movies. And then, Dirty Harry and the films he did with Don Siegel here. So, it's just a great career he's had. Where Eagles Dare is one of my favorite films of all time that he starred in back with Richard Burton back in '69. So yeah, it's just great to see that he's continuing to work. I just think it's really cool when you see these kind of directors who have this huge history behind them continuing to work into their older years. Like Francis Ford Coppola's shooting a new movie now. Obviously Scorsese keeps going, or even people who've left us like Sidney Lumet, who was working up right until the end. So, props to them for sure. And that pretty much wraps up everything I kind of noticed going on news-wise that kind of caught my interest. So, going to move right on into talking about a film I watched. First time watch last night. I was in the mood for a little bit of made-for-TV terror, so I went with a 1974 movie I had never seen before. It was an ABC movie of the week. A Tuesday movie of the week, to be precise, and it's called The Stranger Within. So it stars Barbara Eden, I Dream of Jeannie fame, of course, and George Grizzard as a married couple. They've been married for over a decade, and she's an artist, and he's a college teacher. And starts right out with him coming home, and she informs him that she's pregnant. But this, of course, doesn't make sense because he had a vasectomy 3 years ago. So they just kind of take it as some kind of, something happened. Obviously, his surgery was not entirely successful. Um, but then, as they go about their doctor's appointments, they realize there's no way that he could be the father of this child, which of course leads him to start having doubts about his wife's faithfulness, which of course upsets her because she's convinced that he's the father. But then Barbara Eden, Jeannie, starts exhibiting some very unusual behavior. She starts pouring salt on everything. She's speed reading through academic books. She wants the temperature always low. The house, which she was always very tidy about, is becoming a mess. So she's exhibiting all kinds of strange behavior. And then the baby inside her seems to be growing at a very fast rate. And on top of this is the fact that she had a health scare during when trying to become pregnant prior to the vasectomy. So there's concerns about how this pregnancy is even going to be affecting her overall physical health. But when they make efforts to try to have an abortion for her, to multiple attempts to surgically remove the fetus because they're concerned about this pregnancy killing her, things arise. She starts experiencing horrible, painful side effects that prevent the surgeries from happening. I think if I describe this best as a cross between Rosemary's Baby and Village of the Damned, I think you get an idea of where the storyline's heading, and that's not like a spoiler. I mean, you just you read the log line on IMDb or the back of the DVD box. You get an idea, a general sense of where things might be heading with the narrative, and where this stranger within this unknown child came from. I finished it, and my girlfriend asked me, she was watching a different movie in the other room. She asked me what I thought of it, and I was like, well, I think it's, I don't know if I would say that was a good movie, but I enjoyed watching it. This was written by Richard Matheson, who, of course, is a really, legendary genre writer in terms of the literature he wrote, the short stories and novels, and also the screenplays. He wrote several of Roger Corman's Edgar Allan Poe adaptations, including Pit and the Pendulum, which I talked about last week. He wrote both the novel and the screenplay for The Incredible Shrinking Man, and the original short story and screenplay for Steven Spielberg's Duel. He collaborated several times with Dan Curtis, including writing both Kolchak movies and Trilogy of Terror. And he wrote the novel I Am Legend, which was the basis for several well-linked film adaptations over the years. And this he adapted from a novelette he wrote called Trespass. Interestingly, like I said, you watch it and you can think, okay, this is, this film came out in 1974. Rosemary's Baby the movie was 68. And there's a TV sequel that came out roughly around this time. Village of the Damned and Children of the Damned were in the 60s. So, they're just kind of copying and pasting. But the truth is that the original novelette that this was based on, Trespass, actually came out in 53. So it predates both the source novel for Village of the Damned, which is John Wyndham's The Midwich Cuckoos, which wasn't published till 57, and Rosemary's Baby, which the novel that movie is based on came out in 67. So, I mean, it's possible that the genesis of this film adaptation was the success of those kind of films, and but the actual idea, assuming it adheres faithfully to the Richard Matheson's original story, predated those projects. Interestingly, I saw a picture of an early draft of the script. It was for sale online. It had already sold, but they still had the image up of it, and it actually used the title Trespass. That's the title they originally were going for before they changed it to The Stranger Within. And the interesting thing about that actually is that Matheson, one of his many TV writing credits, was also the original Star Trek episode, The Enemy Within, which is the one in which a transporter accident creates a doppelganger of Kirk, an evil doppelganger of Kirk, who comes aboard the Enterprise. But, Matheson, I'm a big fan of his work. I like those movies I just mentioned, like Duel, and the very first adaptation of I Am Legend, which was the Vincent Price movie, The Last Man on Earth, as well as Pit and the Pendulum. As I said, those are great films. Duel is incredibly suspenseful. Last Man on Earth, very atmospheric, and also Matheson also wrote the Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, the classic Twilight Zone episode with William Shatner, which is very deservedly considered one of the best episodes of that show. Also wrote a really solid suspense kind of horror adjacent TV movie, The around this time called Dying Room Only with Cloris Leachman, which I definitely recommend checking out. But this is definitely not his finest hour. A big issue with this film, which clocks in at about 74 minutes, is just that it really stretched it. I mean, there's a lot of just shots of people sitting and thinking, or Barbara Eden walking through nature, or you could get drunk off a drinking game of how many times they show George Grizzard backing his car down this driveway. I mean, it's incredible the detail they give to the fact that George Grizzard lives lives in a house with a garage on a road, which is on an incline, but insists, instead of every time he has to drive down the hill, instead of just turning his car around or parking in the garage, he backs it all the way down the hill. And they show this several times. So there's a lot of little things like that it's very, it's never to the point of like boredom, but it's very obviously, comes across as padding and stretching the material out to fit this runtime of what would have been like a 90-minute movie with commercials. Not great to do that, right, with just that kind of material, just with straight padding, straight shots like that. You really want to develop the actual story more. Or if you're not going to do that, you want to find more interesting, captivating ways of filling the gaps between story beats and between character conversations than just having to resort to kind of like, all right, we'll just have a few more shots of Barbara Eden sitting on this rock out in this canyon, And the behavior of Barbara Eden throughout the film, the strange behavior of hers, it kind of has a bit of repetitiveness to it. It almost kind of gets to the point where, okay, we get it. She's putting lots of salt on stuff. We get it. So it very much comes across as a short story that, for whatever reason, just could not be successfully adapted into feature length. And I don't know if that was that budget constraints, time constraints, that Matheson couldn't really develop it further. Was it just that's what he turned in? Or was that just a kind of understanding between him and the director? That we're just going to kind of fill in a lot of the gaps here with kind of like mood building of just people thinking and people walking around and backing down driveways. Don't forget about that. It definitely stands out, those kind of issues that the film has with its narrative structure. But it's interesting to notice at the same time, it's not like a project that's phoned in, right? So like this was directed by Lee Phillips, who started out as an actor and had a really big boost to his career right on because he was cast opposite Lana Turner, the male lead role in the original Peyton Place film, which I'm a fan of, and that was a huge film when it came out. Multiple Oscar nominations, including Best Picture, spawned a sequel, and then a hit TV show. And Phillips played the role of Michael Rossi, who comes into the town of Peyton Place to run the school. And he followed that up with some other films. He did Middle of the Night, based off of Paddy Chayefsky work. That starred Kim Novak. And he was in The Hunters, which is a war film with Robert Mitchum. He guest starred on TV shows like The Twilight Zone and Perry Mason. And moving into the early 60s, he was doing just a lot more TV work. Still good shows like Combat. He was on Dr. Kildare, Route 66. Still did a couple films during this time period. One that a lot of horror film fans wouldn't be familiar with is Violent Midnight, which was produced by Del Tenney, the famous low-budget filmmaker who directed The Horror of Party Beach and Curse of the Living Corpse. And it was around this time that Phillips started transitioning to directing, actually, going behind the camera. And he did that in 1963 was when he began that. And it was, again, just episodic television. That's pretty much what he did. But big shows, Donna Reed Show, Dick Van Dyke Show, Andy Griffith Show. Daniel Boone, he actually did direct several episodes of the Peyton Place TV show. And this did a number of television movies as well. He did The Spell, which is the Carrie ripoff with Lee Grant. He did The Red Badge of Courage with Richard Thomas. The Girl Most Likely To, which is this kind of like black comedy, high school comedy with Stockard Channing. And Wanted, The Sundance Woman, which was a 1976 TV movie in which Catherine Ross once again played the role of Etta Place, which she had performed in Bush Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. And interestingly, he would even though he remained active right up to right before he died, he passed away kind of young. He died in 1999. He was only 72 years old. Um, During his entire career, he only directed one theatrically released movie, which was the Gary Coleman vehicle, On the Right Track, which actually did well at the box office. Reviews were kind of middling, and obviously Gary Coleman did not become a film star, but that was his one theatrically released movie that he directed. And he did get a couple Emmy nominations in his career for one for directing an episode of The Waltons, and another for a TV movie called Mae West, a biopic of the famous '30s actress. He definitely didn't. But like I said, he definitely didn't phone in his approach to this movie. A lot of the action takes place in one of two locations. Primarily, the house occupied by Barbara Eden and George Guizzard, and then there are a number of scenes that take place at a hospital. And the house they filmed at is it's a real house. It's not a set, which is great because it's this incredible looking '70s household with a fireplace right in the middle, of the living room, beautiful mustard colored like curtains and drapes and stuff. I would love to live in that house, but it's something that could be very easily stagey. It's something that could, a director could really just go the easy route and just do the masters on these conversation scenes, and then a couple over the shoulders. But Phillips definitely takes a lot of interesting approaches. Sometimes he's employing handhelds, sometimes he's employing stable shots. Definitely in terms of his compositions, he's definitely trying and succeeding actually at keeping an energy and a sense of being alive to the proceedings. Again, this kind of pointing to a bigger problem really being with the script. And again, I don't want to throw that on Richard Matheson. I don't know, what happened with this production that led to such a padded screenplay. But Phillips is definitely working on it to bring it the best he can, to bring it what he can. And props to the cinematographer too for his working with Phillips on this to keep things interesting visually. It's shot by Michael Margulies, who some of his better known credits are the first Police Academy film. He shot the John Cassavetes movie Minnie and Moskowitz, some cult movies early on too, theatrical ones like Dirty Mary, Crazy Larry, The Baby, Brute Core. Did a number of TV movies as well. This was not his only time behind the camera on a small screen project. Sherlock Holmes in New York with Roger Moore, the Gene Roddenberry produced Strange New World, the Questor tapes, another Roddenberry one, and also The Blue Knight, which is the cop TV movie, which was very well acclaimed and won William Holden an Emmy. So yeah, these guys were working to keep things interesting and not taking the easy route out. The cast is good. I mean, it's interesting. It's really only 5 characters in the film. It's Barbara Eden and George Guizzard. They're friends, played by David Doyle and Joyce Van Patten, who are another married couple. David Doyle, of course, from Charlie's Angels, and he's a colleague of George Guizzard's at the college, who also has a background in hypnosis. He's able to use hypnosis, and so that, of course, allows us to get inside Barbara Eden's mind near the end of the film and kind of start to understand what's really going on. And then the great Nehemiah Persoff, the great character actor, whether you know him as Fievel's father, the voice of Fievel's father, or just ridiculous number of films and TV shows he was in, like The Harder They Fall and Dave the Outlaw. Just so much stuff. He plays the couple's doctor, George Guizzard and Barbara Eden's doctors. There's no other than background cast. So there's no other people in this film. I don't believe there's a single other speaking part in the movie, but they're all good. I think that Eden's kind of a little bit of the weaker part. The other ones are really tried and true character actors, and they're completely, this kind of thing you get in this kind of a film. They're just effortless in it, and just totally selling the material. I think Eden, she's a bit weaker in terms of her performance, but I don't know that that's entirely on her. Again, I think that the film is trying to communicate her, her strange behavior, her unnatural behavior, just by constantly like hitting the hammer on, okay, she's pouring tons of salt on stuff. Okay, she's going to kick the blankets off. Okay, she's going to have a total mood swing. And I don't know that it's giving her the chance to bring the kind of nuance that might be better in that kind of situation. It also doesn't really, and this is a part where maybe, they could have solved some of the issues with padding. You don't really spend much time with this character, basically no time with Barbara Eden's character prior to her transformation really into this, strangely behaving person. And perhaps more of that at the beginning of the film would have made her behavior later on more impactful, would have given her a chance to kind of bring more color to the character, and also, again, would have allowed them to kind of lose some of that more superfluous stuff later on in the film. But she in the scenes where, I guess you could say, the more normal scenes, the more dramatic scenes where she's just kind of getting into it with her husband about this pregnancy, that definitely shows her in the best spot. I think that's an interesting thing too about the film is just the whole approach of, obviously it's not the only film of this type that's kind of covered that, but the whole idea of, you go into this like this is going to be a genre film, this is going to be a horror film, she's going to be pregnant with this strange child, but taking time to kind of look at a realistic side effect of that, which is, okay, your husband's going to think you cheated on him because he knows he can't be the father. So it was cool that they kind of took some time with that. I thought that was added an interesting dynamic to it. Now, I mean, this is like a really great example, though, of a movie that, despite its flaws, is totally engaging and totally entertaining, in part because of the time it was shot in. Like I said, they're filming on real locations, so it's like this incredible 70s house. And then there's a scene between George Guzard and David Doyle where they're eating at a cafeteria at like this college they work at, and it's incredible. It's like all olive green wallpaper and olive green furniture. It's beautiful. And again, it's a real location. It's interesting. I thought this, a friend of mine, Brett Owen, he saw that I had watched this movie. Brett played Jason Frankenstein's father in The Last Frankenstein. But he's also a fan of this kind of era of films, and he saw that I watched it, and he sent me a link to another podcast, which was talking about this film. And I only got a chance to listen to the beginning of that podcast, but they said something right at the beginning, which I thought the same thing when I was watching it. And that's that if this was made today, this would be a Lifetime movie. And it's true. This would totally be something that would play on Lifetime now. But if it was shot now, and whether it played on Lifetime or somehow got into a network, which would never happen really anymore, they don't really do the TV movies anymore. I mean, it would just be, I could just imagine it being shot in the most boring, like contemporary locations. Even if it was shot in the early 90s or even the late 80s, this film would really suffer because you'd have all those flaws still that we covered, but then you'd have a completely uninteresting aesthetic, unless you're into that kind of thing. But I am not into the decor and styles of that time period. Especially nowadays time period. I think also that there's a sense of craziness, a little bit of over the top attitude that the film brings in certain moments. That, again, coming with it being in the environment of a 1970s film, it's just more impactful. I think, the scenes of Barbara eating strange, weird foods, her chugging of coffee. There's a couple of moments in there where they do lean into those kind of like, oh, this is really bizarre. They're not just, again, a lot of times it's just kind of a little bit repetitive in nature, just kind of hammering the same point over and over. But there are some moments where they kind of really dig into it and really try to have a nice over the top moment that does come across better. And I think, again, that stuff kind of carries a lot more weight just by virtue of the time period it's in. Because like I said, despite these issues, I definitely enjoyed it. Like like I said, I'm not going to recommend this to people in the same way that I would like a movie of a TV movie of that time period that truly is great, like Duel, being an excellent example. But it accomplishes, kind of this key responsibility of a movie, which is that it engrosses you, and the payoff at the end, obviously I'm not going to give anything away, but while not fully successful in the way that they depict what happens at the end, it does have enough of an impact to kind of make you chuckle to yourself, be like, all right, I get what they're doing here. They're having fun with it. It's also great to see, Barbara Eden, no matter what she's doing in the movie, there's scenes where she's like in bed sleeping, and you can tell she's still got her makeup on, still has all her jewelry on. I'm a big fan of the movie Bullet, the Steve McQueen movie Bullet, and there's a great commentary track on the DVD and Blu-ray for that movie with Peter Yates, the director. And there's a scene where in that movie where Steve McQueen, his girlfriend's played by Jacqueline Bisset. Steve McQueen plays Bullet, the police officer, and the lovely, beautiful Jacqueline Bisset, early on in her career, plays his girlfriend, and he sees her in bed. He opens like a door or something, I think, and checks on her. And on the commentary track, Peter Yates notices how like perfect her hair is, even though she's in bed in the morning having supposedly slept overnight. And he says something like, "Oh, I think we were a little too Hollywood on that." And that's exactly what I thought whenever I saw Barbara Eden. Like, there's a lot of scenes where she's in bed in this movie because she's, they're again kind of really digging down on that, her like kicking off the covers and constantly wanting to be colder and having the temperature down. So there's a lot of shots of her at rest where you can see like the eyeshadow under her eyes still, and she's still got like all her rings on. So yeah, it's a little Hollywood at moments like that for sure. Definitely a fun film still. Warner Archives put this out on DVD. Pretty cheap. Sometimes you can pick them up for like $10 depending when they have their sales. The master that they used is, older, still pretty solid visual presentation. I'd love it if they put stuff like this out on Blu-ray though, and just completely gave it a new high def scan. There are some scenes in this film which are kind of shot deliberately low light interior scenes, which I think would be really nice to see that stuff get a whole new fresh breath blown into them. I don't know how high up on Warner's priority list a title like this is, but they have done some other TV movies, horror TV movies from the 70s. In the not too distant past, like Bad Ronald and the Bermuda Depths. So hopefully they'll get to this one sooner rather than later. But yeah, I definitely enjoyed it. I definitely think it's fun to check out if you're, like me, a fan of 70s TV movies in general and the horror ones more specifically. Also, shout out to Charles Fox, who did the music for this. Fox did several films with Larry Pierce back in the day. He had a couple Oscar nominations, still with us actually, in his early 80s. He had some good moments in this with the themes he came up with. Like the end theme was one of the ones that really kind of stood out to me the most. Yeah, check it out though. The Stranger Within, 1974, and let me know what you think about it. So, shout me out on the on Facebook, or shoot us an email over at carpetcitycinema@gila-film.com to let us know what you thought about this. That's going to kind of wrap things up for tonight. Kind of a shorter episode. Continue to spread the word about the podcast and about The Last Frankenstein. We do have some big announcements coming up on that. Hopefully, I know I keep saying like hopefully next week, we'll see, but there is definitely some big stuff at work with that we want to put out there. But yeah, thank you for continuing to listen to the podcast and for supporting Gila Films. Like I said, if you have any questions or any thoughts on things, just feel free to shoot us an email or message us on the Facebook pages. Give us a like. Give us a like for the episodes we've been uploading to YouTube. I've uploaded all the episodes of the podcast to YouTube, and we'll do so with this one as well. So thank you very much for the support, and take care.